Dear colleagues and friends, welcome to this session, during which we will be celebrating the World Mental Health Day for 2023. The topic for this year's World Mental Health Day is mental health is a universal human right, a very appropriate topic which has been decided upon democratically by many people who have agreed to make this the topic of this year's Mental Health Day. So I would like to start by saying something about the World Federation for Mental Health, which sets this theme and which has initiated the World Mental Health Day. This organization was established just after World War II in 1948. In 1992, the World Mental Health Day has been launched for the first time on the 10th October. And this year, 2023, we have the 75th anniversary of the World Mental Health Organization. Dear friends, there have been many international declarations about human rights. In 1948, we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly, and which mentions in Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Then in 1966, we had the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It was adopted on that date. And this document in Article 12 recognizes the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. This declaration mentions the word mental. In 2007, we had the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and this mentions that we should promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities. In my own country, in Greece, human rights are guaranteed by the Constitution itself in Articles 4 to 25. The issue is that in spite of these declarations, the rights for mental health are violated because there is discrimination in education, in employment, in housing, and in health, because there is perpetuation of stereotypes, and because there is social stigmatization that leads to marginalization and sometimes to exclusion. May I mention what Robin Williams, the well-known actor who has died by suicide, said. Robin said, "I used to think that the worst thing in life was to end up all alone. It is not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people who make you feel alone." And this situation has been characterized as a failure of humanity. I can use some figures about what is happening in a very serious mental illness, schizophrenia, but I don't want to take your time. The figures refer to unemployment, which is very advanced in people with schizophrenia, homelessness, Suicide, 50% of the patients with schizophrenia manifest suicidal behavior, and 5 to 10% actually kill themselves. I could mention that they are victims of homicide. The story goes that the mental patients kill others, but the truth is that they are killed by others. Then, if we come to medicine, we see that they rarely undergo procedures like angioplasty, that these patients are less likely to be hospitalized for treatment of diabetes complications. They smoke a percentage much greater than the general population. 65% of people with schizophrenia smoke, in contrast to only 33% of the general population in the United Kingdom. In America, it's even worse. And we all know that smoking increases the chances of developing schizophrenia. This is a recent finding which needs to be replicated, but there is strong evidence for that. If we continue, we'll see that smoking cessation techniques are effective in patients with severe mental illness as well, but these techniques are not offered to them. Substance abuse also is more frequent in this category of people. If we come to families and carers, we will see that they suffer from stress, they have problems with somatic health and neglect their health. This will be dealt with later on by many speakers. But the services that families and carers provide are cost effective, and this is very important for people who plan mental health services. Mental health workers share the stigma and discrimination with their patients, and we all know that doctors who deal with mental health, people suffering from mental health issues, are also characterized as weird and strange and so on and so forth. In spite of evidence revealing the opposite, we've done some research in Athens, and we've shown that trainees in psychiatry have more stable personalities than trainees in medicine. And this has been replicated by Belgrade colleagues of the Institute for Mental Health. The society is not always friendly. We used to avoid strange and unusual. We believe in the myth of people with severe mental illness being dangerous. We consider mental health of lesser priority. And this has been shown during the economic crisis, when people were asked which services should be curtailed to save money. People responded, mental health services, which is, well, to me, this is very strange. They are concerned about economic consequences of treating mental patients, and they are concerned about job competition. But public spending for mental health is cost-effective, early intervention is cost-effective, and prevention is cost-effective. The underfunding concerns mainly mental health services, and there is a difference between funding for somatic health and mental health. And the same stands for budgets for research. So it's important to increase the budget for mental health and to see to it that there's appropriate channeling of this money. All these situations that I have described have led to people with severe mental illness dying 15 to 20 years earlier than the general population. And this has rightly been characterized as a scandal. So there is a serious ethical issue here. We have to wonder whether the patients with severe mental illness as children of a lesser God, whether what we're doing is in fact an indirect euthanasia, and if we take the rules for ethics, the basic ethical principles which refer to health and mental health, of Elaine, Mivlaptin, autonomy, and justice. There's limited autonomy because the mental patients are committed rather than treated. And of course, there is no justice for them. So I stop here, and thank you very much for listening to me. And I would like to ask Nikos to please translate the salutation of the Deputy Minister of Health on matters of mental health, Dr. Dimitrios Vartzopoulos, who is a colleague, a psychiatrist. But before doing that, perhaps we should show the video. It is in Greek, but it doesn't last long. If we can do that, and then Nikos will highlight the basic points in English.
Κύριε καθηγητά, επίτιμοι καλεσμένοι, αγαπητές και αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, σας ευχαριστώ που μου δώσατε την ευκαιρία να προσφωνήσω μια τόσο σημαντική συνάντηση. Η Παγκόσμια ημέρα ψυχικής υγείας μας δίνει κάθε χρόνο μια ευκαιρία να αναλογιστούμε συνολικά για την πορεία των θεμάτων ψυχικής υγείας στην πατρίδα μας. Η επομένη χρονιά θα είναι σημαδιακή και για την ψυχική υγεία και για τη χώρα μας. Η κυβέρνηση Μητσοτάκη θα προχωρήσει σε σημαντική αναδιάταξη του τρόπου λειτουργίας και δόμησης όλων των υπηρεσιών ψυχικής υγείας. Ολοκληρώνοντας ύστερα από 30 χρόνια την ψυχιατρική μεταρρύθμιση, θα μεταξελίξουμε τους υφισταμένους σήμερα οργανισμούς σε δίκτυα υπηρεσιών ψυχικής υγείας απευθείας υπαγόμενα στη ΣΥΠΕ, με ενιαία διοίκηση υπηρεσιακή και επιστημονική. Με την βοήθεια του ηλεκτρονικού χάρτη ψυχικής υγείας και του ψηφιακού ίχνους κάθε ασθενούς που θα έχουμε σε λίγο στη διάθεσή μας, θα επιτύχουμε τον βέλτιστο συντονισμό όλων των υφισταμένων δυνατοτήτων για την πρόληψη, θεραπεία και την ψυχοκοινωνική αποκατάσταση κάθε ανθρώπου με προβλήματα ψυχικής υγείας, έτσι ώστε να μην μείνει κανείς πίσω. Ευχαριστώ.
So thanks. Let me see if I can summarize succinctly this very short message by the Deputy Minister for Health in Greece, who is responsible for mental health, particularly. He started off by thanking us for the opportunity to address our meeting and considers the World Mental Health Day as an opportunity to consider issues of importance for mental health in their entirety. So it is like a review point for the minister. In Greece, he considers the coming year to be of pivotal importance for mental health. The reason being that the government has decided to implement a significant restructuring of the function and structure of mental health care services. And that restructuring is going to conclude, according to the minister, 30 years of psychiatric reform. The government plans to transition all existing infrastructure into mental health service networks, which will report directly to the local health authority as opposed to the ministry. And they will have a common operational and scientific leadership locally. This restructuring will be guided by the National Health Service map and the digital reform that is also planned to take place very soon, with which each service user will have a particular fingerprint, and that will be able to be followed through their journey into services. That will give services the opportunity for better cooperation and coordination, and to coordinate all the operational capabilities of the system in order to ensure prevention, treatment, and psychosocial rehabilitation for anyone with mental ill health. And the minister concludes by saying that all those measures are geared towards achieving the following, that nobody is left behind, and then thanked the audience.
Okay, thank you very much, Nikos. Spyros, do you have something to say as a representative of EPIONI?
We can say that we are very glad to host for a second year this World Mental Health Awareness event virtually and hybrid, because we are in Metropolitan College in the city of Athens with some live audience too. I would like to say that today is the European Carers Day. So to have in mind that it's 6th of October, it's the European Carers Day. We will listen later to Stacey Gemonos, the Executive Director of Eurocarers. We collaborate with them. We learn many things about what the current political framework of informal carers, thanks to this organization. So we are very glad to be here and talk about mental health from the perspective of carers. Today we had a very interesting discussion on ADHD in adults and the complete lack of services. There were colleagues from Ireland, from ADHD Ireland, from ADHD Foundation, and even in Greece, we discussed about a tsunami of demand from adults to receive diagnosis of ADHD, and there is a completely lack of services, public and private. So I give the floor now to Mr. Vasilis Bozikas to continue for the greetings.
Professor George Christodoulou, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, at first I would like to congratulate the President of the Executive Committee of the Society of Preventive Psychiatry, Professor George Christodoulou, the General Secretary of the Society of Preventive Psychiatry Associate, Professor Nikos Christodoulou, and the President of the Executive Council of the Greek Carers Network EPIONI, Mr. Spyros Zorbas, for organizing this scientific event dedicated to the World Mental Health Day 2023. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, mental health problems affected around 84 million people in the European Union. That is 1 in 6 people at a cost of 600 billion euros, or more than 4% of the European gross domestic product. Already in 2019, more than 7% of people in the European Union suffered from depression, and 30% felt lonely most of the 30% felt lonely most of the time. These rates are sure to have already increased because of the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic on mental health, but are expected to further increase due to the devastating impact of major global stressors, such as the so-called triple planetary crisis: climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Regarding climate change, the recent wildfires and floodings in Greece underline dramatically how vulnerable is our mental health to it. Unfortunately, the perspective of the first climate immigrants in a European country appears inevitable. Old and new challenges put forth the necessity to reorganize mental health services to effectively address the mental health problem of everyone. The theme of the World Mental Health Day this year is "Mental Health is a Universal Human Right." This theme has chosen to highlight that everyone has the right to high standard and good quality care for his or her mental health problems, if needed, alongside with the right to liberty, independence, and inclusion in the community. The three guiding principles for a modern and effective plan aiming at mental health promotion are: first, access to adequate and effective prevention, not only for the general population, but also for specific high-risk groups For example, people aged between 12 and 25. Adversities and their consequences during the most vulnerable and formative years of one's life could shape physical health and mental health throughout his or her entire lifetime. Early intervention can ensure timely support and may prevent further deterioration of well-being and mental health for this group of young people.
Professor,
Second, yes,
Professor, can we try without your headphones? The sound is not very clear.
without my headphones, yes.
Can you hear me now better?
Yes.
Okay, excuse me. Second, everyone has the right to access to affordable and good quality mental health care and treatment. It is essential to implement best practices and innovative solutions like digital tools to improve mental health care. Third, unfortunately, perpetuation of stereotypes about mental disorders, for example, correlation of violence with mental disorders, incurability of mental disorder, etc., result discrimination, exclusion, and marginalization of those suffering from them, as well as their families and loved ones. Stigma and discrimination exacerbate the personal and economic impacts of mental problems. Reintegration and social inclusion after recovery from a mental disorder should become a major priority. With these few thoughts, I would like to wish every success in your webinar today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bozikas, for your presentation. It was excellent that you highlighted these important points in your talk. I wonder whether Dr. Nasser Loza is with us. Nasser has not appeared yet. Sir Leslie Ebdon hasn't joined in yet. So this gives me the opportunity to convey to you the message of the Minister of Interior, Nikki Kerameos. You may remember that last year, Nikki was with us. She was then the Minister of Education, and her contribution, I think, was substantial. So Nikki, I have translated it. It's a long message, so I have made it rather short. So allow me to mention the basic points. So Nikki says that mental health is a human right, but it is also an obligation of whom? Of governments to protect and promote it, of the international scientific community to highlight its importance and guide the governments to prevention, care, and management, and an obligation of each one of us to demand the right for mental health for us and for others, to accept patients without prejudice and discriminations, thus contributing to the formation of a society that leaves no one behind. This is the same point that Mr. Vartzopoulos has raised. The government recognizes the importance of mental health. They have doubled psychologists and social workers in schools. They have contributed to the electronic transformation of mental health services. They have developed an action plan for the decade 2021-2030 in line with the European framework of the World Health Organization. They're working against stigma for social reintegration and rehabilitation. Now that we are trying to get rid of the pandemic that has created a lot of mental health problems, we should try to integrate mental health in the care for health internationally. I want to warmly congratulate the Society of Preventive Psychiatry, not only for this event, but more than that, for its broader activities, among which the support, provision of information, and sensitization of the public in matters of mental health. I wish you great success in this meeting and more broadly, success in your mission. Thank you. So this refers not only to the Society of Preventive Psychiatry, but also to the European Association of Professors Emeriti, and also to EPIONI, the Greek Carers Network. So if Celeste Ebdon and Nasser Loza have not appeared yet, we can continue with the talks. Spyros, is that okay with you?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Professor Norman.
Professor Norman Sartorius is the first speaker, and Norman is very well known to everybody, so he needs no introduction. He has contributed to mental health throughout his whole life. He is the past president of the World Psychiatric Association, past president of the European Psychiatric Association, and many other organizations. And we have discussed what he's going to talk about. And we thought that perhaps he could touch on two issues, on stigma, on which he's an expert, and he has devoted his life in it, the abolition of stigma, not the creation of stigma, and also the issue of carers, which is a very sensitive issue. So Norman, would you like to take the electronic platform, please?
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate. I would also like to congratulate you for placing the day, the World Mental Health Day, on the day that considers the importance of carers. It is my conviction that the number one priority in psychiatry and in the organization of services nowadays is finding ways in which we can help carers who are becoming less numerous for a variety of reasons, who carry the burden of looking after those who are close to them and dear to them, but also sacrifice a good deal of their own life in order to be helpful in this way. So combining the two is, I think, is not only a coincidence, but it is really a very important statement that you are making by placing the day, the World Mental Health Day webinar on the European Day for Carers. I'll speak about stigma, and I'll show you a few slides, if I may, which I hope I can do. I'm speaking about stigma because I'm convinced, as many of you will know, that this is the number one obstacle that is between us and achieving a better mental health of the population at large, and also a better mental health and better care for people who are struck by a mental illness. So I have to organize myself for a moment to make sure that I do this right. I'm sorry, not quite sure how I do this. Am I doing the right thing? No?
Yes, yes, just share, press the share and screen.
No, I'm not sure I can move them.
Perfect, perfect. We can see your presentation.
So let me start by saying that we have some good news about stigma, because there is a number of countries which have developed well-constructed national programs. In Australia, there is a very large program of this type. New Zealand, next to Australia, of course, has the oldest anti-stigma program in the world. But there are a number of other countries which I've listed on this slide, which have started an anti-stigma program, which is government-sponsored and involves a variety of organizations and bodies within these countries. It's a very good sign, and we hope that these programs will bring results which we are hoping at having. Not only that, but I think that the United Nations have also started an anti-stigma program, this time concerned mainly with their own staff, because some of the people who are in the United Nations experience depression, experience various other problems of this type. And they have noticed that once they have been diagnosed, or once the people know that they have a mental disorder, their effectiveness and acceptance become much lesser, and they suffer. So it's the United Nations have started this program mainly to help their own staff who are not well. It was wonderful to see also that the Ministers of Health who met in the Netherlands just before COVID, subsequently in Paris, both have spoken about mental health and stigma in particular, and tried to see to what an extent they can bring together programs against stigma in different countries. I would not like to forget also that it was a Greek president, while Greece was in the presidency of the European Union, was the first time that mental health was brought on the agenda by Professor Stefanis at the time. I think that gradually we are seeing that in many ministries, people are becoming aware not only that mental health is a major goal which they should try to reach, but also that they have to do something about stigma if they want to go there. It's interesting perhaps that a few weeks ago, the United Nations have passed a very important resolution, the largest and most important resolution. Not only that, but also the first ever that the United Nations have passed. It's the resolution number 77, in which they speak about the importance of mental health and the need to do something specific now to make sure that we help people with mental illness, that we prevent mental illness, which is possible in many instances, and to help those people who look after the mentally ill every day. Now, I think this is important not only because it's humanely a task which humanity should accept, but it's also because it is likely the stigma of mental illness will grow in the future, become more pernicious, more dangerous, and more difficult to bear. Because we are seeing that there is an increased competitiveness, and the competitiveness as such means that those who compete will in fact not hesitate to use a stigma of mental illness or experience of mental illness as being an important reason for their to win their battles. We have also seen a significant decrease of government resources for health promotion, while the resources and also the cost of treatment of illness have gone up. In many countries, the cost that was there for prevention has been decreased, and the promotion of health and mental health has also received considerably less attention than before. In part, this is because of the significant shift from government and society-run health services to private and for-profit health services, which have never been particularly keen to lump off a part of their profit to use it for the prevention or promotion of mental disorders or the promotion of mental health. So that the huge growth of for-profit healthcare has been a significant factor in our thinking about how to do better in the future. There are also other developments in more recent times which are likely to be of importance in thinking about stigma. One of them is what has been called the commoditification of medicine. The word commoditification is a complex neologism, new word that has been invented by a person who has been working in the World Bank. It basically says that everything in society should be considered as a commodity, like sugar or timber or iron. It should be purchased and sold, and if it is a good price, we should buy more, and so forth. Everything should be handled as a commodity, including health. And in this way, what health, which was previously an ethical imperative for society, has become an economic opportunity in which people are trying to make as much money as they can in various ways. Today we speak, very often you will hear that people speak of a hospital as being a good hospital because it makes a financial profit. And similarly, also many of the measures are not considered in fairness, but are considered on the grounds of the cost which they have. The Lancet series on promotion of mental health and development of mental health services used as a main argument that it's not so very expensive to treat mentally ill people. This is important and true, but that is not the main reason why we want to help mentally ill people. We want to help them because it's a human right to be treated and given care, and it's a part of society's duty to do this. Now, other reasons which also lead to this, I think, prediction that there will be more stigma is that the communities worldwide have broken up because mainly of urbanization, of people who have gone to towns. In towns, some countries now have a huge proportion of their population living in towns. Argentina, for example, has now reached 95% of its population living in towns. And towns as such are not particularly convenient places to develop close communities. People who live in high dwellings do not know each other. They are living in the same place, but are not sharing their resources. They're not sharing their news. They're in fact living next to each other, not together. And urbanization, which is continuing to grow, will undoubtedly lead to a further enhancement of this breakdown of, and also create a useful terrain for the development of stigma. The increasing complexity of labor, which is listed on this slide as well, is mentioned here because as labor becomes more and more complex, the chances that we can employ people who are maybe temporarily or for a longer time unable to do complex work will be decreased. And that will decrease the possibility for employment and therefore also the burden that may be experienced by the society and by carers. So we can ask ourselves now whether the postulates which we have said in the beginning of the 20th century and throughout the 20th century are still valid. Or have we now learned something of how we should build programs against stigma in a due style? So the first postulate of fighting stigma was that we should make long-term plans and we should base our work on results of scientific research. But it's not true that this is possible. In many places, there are no studies on matters relevant to stigma. And if you're going to study first and do something later, we are going to be probably exposing many people to a very bad time. Equally so, most studies which we have in scientific research deals with large populations, but people live in smaller places and the average does not apply to anybody. Nobody is ever met an average man. They are living in smaller groups and therefore we must think of other ways of constructing programs, not basing it exclusively on science. Science is an important contribution, but those who are most concerned, that is the patients and their families and other carers, they know best what disturbs them, and they should probably be in the center of decisions about stigma program should be built. And we should also consider that the best strategy will be that of enlightened opportunism. Having strict plans is less good than being very watchful and very sensitive to think if an opportunity presents itself to do something, to do it, even if it wasn't very strictly planned. Now, the second postulate of the anti-stigma programs is that the effectiveness of program should be measured by the change of attitudes to mental illness. Mental ill people should be better received. Their family should be more inclusive. But as we think about it, it's not really true. Number one, attitudes do not necessarily predict behavior. People will say, yes, I'm willing, and mentally ill people are just like anybody else. But if you ask that same person, would you employ a person who has just come out of a mental hospital? It's very likely that his behavior will be different from what he has claimed as an attitude. And I think that therefore we should start thinking that programs against stigma are successful if they change behavior, the number of employed people, if they change laws, if they change the budget which is given to people, if they change the way in which, in fact, services and societies run. The third postulate that we have used at the time was that improving knowledge about mental illness will diminish stigma and discrimination. Not true. In fact, in some places, for example, in Spain, we have discovered that stigma has increased after we provided information about the illness. And I think that it's because there is a phenomenon which has been called selective perception. People remember better what is in keeping, what is in harmony with their prejudice. So when we provide them information, they only remember things which are in harmony with their prejudice. And therefore, very often by educating people, we are not doing as much. We should show them how they can live together with people who are not well. That will change. And the most powerful and practically the only really powerful way of dealing with stigma is making it possible to have society, have people meet one another. Social contact has been shown as the single most effective way of dealing with stigma. And one should think of ways in which we can facilitate the possibility of social contact and social cohesion, because that will make a difference while the others will not. We have thought that the placement of people with mental illness into their community will destigmatize psychiatry. Unfortunately, that is also not true. Number one, because the communities are vanishing and community care must take new forms. We now have electronic communities, we have now the Facebook community and various others. And we should think a little bit whether this is so true, that the fact that we are discharging people will in fact change the attitude of the population to them. It's much more work that one should introduce. One should think about schools early in the education of children, of introducing subjects which will teach them and make them accept people who are different. People are not just like themselves, but are equally so people, and therefore have to be accepted and live together. We should fight against tolerating mentally ill people. We do not want them to be tolerated. We want them to be included as anybody else, disregarding some of the differences that have been stated until now. Then there was a postulate that we should have campaigns against stigma. And we have seen that this is not true. That in fact, short-term campaigns leave little trace in the attitudes, that we have to think about a continuing effort rather than a campaign this year for stigma and next year for liver disease. We should think about a continuing influence on schooling, on education, continuing influence on the working together with journalists and people who are in the press. We should think about securing and making it possible to have social contact between people who are mentally ill and those who are not. And I think that these are different ways. It recalls for a reorganization of our work in this respect. Finally, we have been saying that anti-stigma messages should be directed at largest possible audience. But we have learned that population groups have very different needs. They view the disease in a different way. They understand the disease in a different way. And therefore, any stigma activity must be oriented to specific needs of a group. When we speak with judges, we should think is what are the role of the judges? What is their work like? How are they going to meet mentally ill people? In what form should we work with them? Which will be different from working and trying to diminish stigma in policemen or in teachers or in some other group. So that the specific training activities, specific activities to diminish stigma must be defined by the people at whom these programs are directed. So in summary, I put this slide up here. You will see that we have previously said that we will base our targets in anti-stigma program on evidence. We now see, wait a minute now, evidence is fine, but let us also talk with people and find out what they want and what disturbs them. We thought previously that we should address the whole population. We say yes, but we should make different programs for different subgroups in the population, for judges, for teachers, etc. We said that the duration of the program should be a few years. Previously, we now know that it must be a normal part of programs, of routine work. There should be an element in the budget that deals with stigma continuously. We thought that we can measure the effects by attitudes, but we know that we must measure them by behavior. We thought that it's enough that we provide knowledge, but we have learned that we should do something else about this, that we should, number one, we should increase the self-esteem of people who are mentally ill and their families. We should help them to learn how to cope and care. And I think that that type of teaching will be better and more useful than the one where we are giving them facts about a certain thing. Finally, we have been previously thinking that it's enough to eliminate discrimination. It is not. I think that's a very important step to eliminate discrimination. It's a very important step to decrease social distance. But the real success and our goal should be the inclusion of people who have the mental illness and their families in society, in which there are many people who differ from one another in very many ways. So, ladies and gentlemen, stigma, I think, is still the main obstacle to better mental health care. And the first step in such programs is to start from ourselves and think, what is my attitude? And what can I do to change the situation? And how can I help others to do the same? We have had a major program against stigma in 17 different countries. In each and all of them, the program was successful. So I think that it's important to recognize that it is possible to do something, and that therefore the knowledge that it is possible should stimulate us in working more and doing something about it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Norman, for this stimulating talk that has raised very many issues which can be discussed, I think, if we have time at the end. Very impressive talk. Thank you very much. We move on to Professor Danuta Wasserman, who is the president of the World Psychiatric Association.
Hello, my name is Danuta Wasserman, and I am president of the World Psychiatric Association. Today we celebrate globally Mental Health Day. Why do we need to celebrate this day? It is very important because this day reminds us, but also politicians and decision makers, that we need to have more resources to have open conversations about mental illnesses, to advocate for better treatment and care, and by those conversations and discussions, we will reduce the stigma, which very often is associated with mental health disorders. What is mental health? There are many definitions, but probably the best one is one produced by the World Health Organization. And this definition says that mental health is a state of mental well-being which enables us to cope with the stresses of everyday life, to realize our abilities, to learn well, to work well, and to contribute to the family and community. Global burden of mental disorders is huge. And mental disorders, with depressive disorders alone as the second leading cause of global years lived with disability, costs a lot of economical resources due to the lost productivity and lack of mental well-being. Global prevalence and burden of mental disorders is also high among adolescents. More than 248 million young people and young adults live with a mental disorder. Anxiety disorders, depressive disorders being on the top. There is a huge gap still between the needs for treatment and treatment. Why it is so? We know that demand for services in all countries, both high income and low and middle income countries, is huge. But due to the lack of economical resources, In the low-income countries, we have limited mental health infrastructure, we have few specialized facilities and less professionals to meet the needs of the population. The situation is better in high-income countries, but all of us know that the resources are still not sufficient. We know also that we have thousands of investigations and millions of invested funds in research, but still the mental disorders are not sufficiently treated due to the lack of available treatments, but also due to the lack of implementation of the knowledge we have about efficacy of our treatments into clinical practice. To achieve further progress, besides increased economic resources, we really need to work for a paradigm shift. It means to have structural instruments to implement our research findings, both in the clinical practice, but also in public mental health. We need to focus on promotion of healthy lifestyles in addition to existing treatments, as there is evidence now that healthy lifestyles contribute to maintenance, but also prevent mental health illnesses and problems. We need also to focus on early prevention and to use preventive methods in working places and in schools. During my presidency until 2026, I, together with my planning group, constructed an action plan for the World Psychiatric Association, in which we will try to increase knowledge, decrease stigma, both in general population, psychiatric patients and the families, but also eagerly to promote healthy lifestyles, especially physical activity, sleep hygiene, nutrition. Other healthy lifestyles, which are also important, like access to green space, intellectual stimuli, and work with prevention in working places and educational settings, will be performed by our many and very skillful scientific sections. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to greet you during this very important day. Thank you.
Many thanks to Danuta for this very interesting video. Spiro, do we have Afzal Javed connected? He was he was not sure that he would make it, but I wonder whether he managed.
Unfortunately, I cannot see if
okay.
it's connected.
And the rest of the people, Nasser Loza and Leslie Ebdon, have not appeared yet. Yes?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, we go on then to the video talk of Lydia Lazeri, who is the regional advisor for mental health of the World Health Organization. She is responsible for Europe. And Lydia was in Armenia. She was dealing with this exodus situation.
Good afternoon, good evening. A very, very warm greeting from Copenhagen, from the regional office for Europe in WHO, to you colleagues in Athens and elsewhere in Europe. I regret not to be able to join you live due to other commitments, but rest assured, please, that like you in Athens, the whole of Europe is celebrating the World Mental Health Day, because we are living at an unprecedented time of awareness and acknowledgement of the importance of mental health, not only in the public health in general, but also in the cohesion of societies. As we have seen from COVID-19, the mental health services and systems were unable to cope with the increased demand for those services, also to unsuspecting vulnerable groups such as, for instance, the healthcare workers. We saw that due to decades of under-prioritization, underfunding, and under-resourcing of mental health services and systems, our systems were not able to cope with not only an increased demand, but also with a community that is evolving every day. What we're seeing is that a series, a consecution of crises that in WHO Europe we are calling a perma-crisis, such as, for instance, starting with COVID-19, but also the number of armed conflicts that we are having in our region in WHO Europe. And I mind the plural here, because we are having more than one conflict occurring now. But also a crisis such as, for instance, natural disasters, provoked emergencies, and Greece hasn't been spared by such disasters. The cost of living, a steep increase, are causing not only a very relevant impact on the mental health of our populations, but also are eroding the trust in the institutions that is so important for cohesive societies. So as such, if we want to be able not only to play our role as mental health workers into addressing mental health of individuals, but if we also want to contribute to the well-being of cohesive societies, we need to rethink our mental health systems and services. WHO, together with the global mental health community, has called for decades for community-based mental health services that can be built hand in hand with deinstitutionalization processes towards services that are fit for purpose and that are oriented towards recovery. But what do we mean by community? Until very recently, communities were understood as physical spaces where people meet and people live their life and people interact and exchange with each other. So communities were primarily seen as physical spaces. But let me remind us all how the community is becoming increasingly digital. Agoras, as they were seen from ancient Greece, are now moving someplace else, and those are the digital spaces. Mainly our young people are increasingly moving their interconnectedness into digital spaces through digital tools, social media, artificial intelligence, if you like, etc., etc. And therefore, we need not only to be aware and acknowledge this change, but we also need to design our responses accordingly. We can no longer talk about community-based mental health services without taking into account how communities are changed, how communities are no longer physical spaces that have been seen as for social interaction purposes only, but communities are also where people live their lives in education. Schools and academic institutions are also communities. Workplaces are communities. Digital spaces, as are mentioned, are communities, and so on. And this is a very good guidance about how mental health systems and services should be built in the very near future, that we need to take into account how communities are evolving so that our systems and services are tailored and not the other way around. The second consideration is who are the systems and services for? It has traditionally been the prerogative of the health providers to decide how systems and services are. And this is not only in mental health, but there has been an increasing empowerment of the user communities, of the communities that use the health services. So an increased empowerment for having more voice from those communities, not only to evaluate and to assess how those services are delivered to them, but also how those services are planned, are designed, and therefore are then organized and delivered. So the voice of mental health service users has become a very important part in the stakeholder table. All those who sit around the table should necessarily include persons with lived experience in a non-tokenistic way. We have seen often how mental health service users sit around the table so that we, the health providers, can tick a box and say that our services were designed and planned with participation by mental health service users. But this is no longer the case. People with lived experience are expecting real participation, and this is what I think this is what has inspired the theme of the World Mental Health Day of this year, that mental health is a human right, because it is the right of the persons who receive the services to be able to have a say on how those services are planned, are designed, are regulated, are monitored, are evaluated. And then the cycle continues. So participation of people with lived experience is the second point that we in WHO Europe would like to highlight as a very important message for this year's Mental Health Day. A third point is, how do we invest into the services? There is always lamentation, collective lamentation by mental health service providers and policymakers that the budgets to mental health are low, and this is true. There is no country that invests sufficiently into the mental health services. But what is another truth is that not only that we have low budget, but those budgets can be distributed better. We should not only invest more, but we should invest better. And there are two moments that I would like to make here. One moment is that the promotion and prevention aspects of mental health systems and services budgets, they are very often seen as an afterthought. So you very often have initiatives in promotion campaigns, for instance, that are seen as separate initiatives from the whole continuum of mental health systems and services. And this is not serving the greater purpose of having an integral, comprehensive network of mental health systems and services. So the investing in promotion and prevention should not be an afterthought. It should not be in parallel, but should be an integral part of the planning and regulating of mental health systems and services. The second point is financing. We are not able today to measure how countries are financing their mental health systems for one simple reason, because mental health services are scattered and fragmented. Some of them sit under primary health care, some others sit under the hospital care of the same Ministry of Health, and some other services in the same country sit under the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. So it is very often difficult for a country to trace how they are paying for mental health services. This fragmentation should come to an end. And not only the fragmentation, but also the way how we budget for services. In most countries, the budget is historical, meaning take the budget from last year, add an inflation adjustment, and then there you have the budget for next year. This has to come to an end, because this approach does not account for evolving needs, for new emerging needs, and for evolving communities. So if we are able to rethink our mental health systems and services as per evolving communities, if we are able to truly, authentically include the voice of the persons with lived experience and their carers, and last but not least, if we are able to invest more, and as importantly, invest better, we will be able to see a change in how our mental health systems and services are planned, are designed, are delivered, are monitored, are evaluated, and then improved. And with this, a big thanks to Professor Christodoulou again, a big bow of respect to the esteemed colleagues in this panel, and looking forward to continue working with you for better mental health systems and services in Europe. Have a great evening all. Thank you.
Very good presentation by Lydia. We're all impressed by what she said. And of course, we understand that she has been very busy because she prepared it this morning. I was impressed with the fact that somebody in the background did not permit us to see the beautiful face of Lydia, because they were at times blocking her face, but I suppose this was a technical irregularity. Now we go on with Kelly Panagiotopoulou. Kelly is a physician. She's an allergist and she deals with autoimmune illnesses, but she's mainly interested in psychosomatic illness and mental health. So, Kelly, can we hear what you have to say to us?
Thank you, dear Professor Christodoulou, for your kind introduction and your honorable invitation to participate to this very important webinar. My topic is mental health as a human right of patients, families, and carers. And I would like to welcome you all and start with the main objectives of the Greek Carers Network EPIONI, which are to support family carers in Greece, regardless of the age, background, or special health need of the person they care for, to increase consciousness and recognition of their significant contribution to the Greek healthcare system and the economy as a whole. Support national policies that respond to the special needs and interests of carers in order to enable them to remain professionally and socially active. Sorry, I can't seem to move on. Okay. I was honored to represent EPIONI during the presentation of the Eurocarers positions for carers in the European Parliament in Brussels. I spoke to the European Parliament on behalf of the Greek carers. This intervention was successful and resulted to the European directive that our country incorporated in 2021 and provides facilities and protection to parents and caregivers. In Greece, carers are usually women, as it is expected of them. In Greek culture, a family obligation to seek relatives exists for many centuries now. Family caregivers in Greece are often unaware of their role as those tasked with providing care. In Greece, we lack evidence concerning the number of carers. It is estimated that 1/3 of the population belongs to a hidden group of family carers. About the nature and the severity of the disease, research studies designed to explore those issues will prove useful. So it is estimated that more than 3,600,000 people in Greece belong to the informal family carers. Of course, it is well documented that family engagement and participation in care ameliorates patient outcomes, reduces stress, and improves quality of life for all family members. But what is the burden of care? Mental and physical health impairment, social adversities and exclusion related to stigma attached to mental illness, interpersonal effects on the entire family system, and of course, financial problems. Significantly higher percentages of depression are reported in the family carers population in comparison to the non-caregivers. And if we look at the distribution of the burden levels, mostly are categorized in moderate and severe. So we cannot think of a patient suffering from mental illness without the family caregiver. Patient and caregiver are involved in all stages of planning, assessment, and decision-making as an expression of interdependence in the therapeutic process. So might I ask, where do we send the patient to? What is the schedule for patients with mental illness following diagnosis? The replacement of the former asylum system of care for the patients with mental diseases by the more humane system of care in the family and the community shows great benefits, but has also unforeseen disadvantages and consequences on the family caregivers. It is imperative to evaluate the aftermath of this practice in order to ameliorate mental health provision, as well as to minimize the problems occurring within the family carers, and hence avoid the development of severe chronic health problems in the caregivers' population. Research studies are necessary in order to explore the relevant magnitude and severity of this phenomenon. The importance of the caregiver's contribution needs to be recognized and acknowledged, as the healthcare community cannot afford to lose their aid or induce their own health deterioration, putting health systems under greater financial strain and compromising the carer's human right to mental health. So from the carer's perspective, the institutionalization of patients suffering from a mental illness offers benefits and humanistic approach to the management of their disease, as care in the community replaced the former asylum system. Evaluation of the aftermath is nevertheless imperative in order to ameliorate the health services provided, as well as to reduce the disadvantages observed, both for the patient and carer. Mental illness deprives life options from the patient, whereas the burden of care deprives life options from the carer. Consequences of care, as chronic stress, depression, psychosomatic symptoms, financial burden, stigma, shame, guilt, employment difficulties, social exclusion, poor quality of life, need to be registered, acknowledged, and solved. The power of human interaction enhances mental health, but is not by itself adequate to promote the patient's and carer's well-being. The evaluation of our current practices concerning mental health will reveal their positive and negative aspects. It is essential to realize that the family care of the mentally ill patient has no relevant specific education, and the provision of care is not a free choice, but a necessity due to the chronic nature and the severity of mental disease. Discussion and exchange between all interested parties, health professionals, patients, caregivers, may result in beneficial changes, and holistic intervention on a political level is necessary in order to reassess, transform, and ameliorate health provision practices. The current imbalance and injustice between carers and non-carers members of the community, as far as it concerns the human right to mental health and quality of life, needs to be demonstrated and restored. The right to mental health and quality of life is indefeasible for sufferers and carers alike. It is a community endeavor and obligation, an expression of humanity and culture. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you very much, Kelly, for this interesting presentation, which highlighted the importance of carers, and especially informal carers. Thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, thanks a million for having me on the agenda of today's discussion. I am very sorry that I cannot be with you in person in beautiful Athens, but I am thrilled to be part of this important conversation. I am extremely grateful that you have chosen to include the perspective of informal carers, the group that my organization represents, as we commemorate World Mental Health Day. Coincidentally, on the 6th of October, we also celebrate European Carers Day, which is a European-wide communication campaign that my organization launched a few years ago to shine a light on the crucial importance of informal care. Research has indeed shown that informal carers across the EU play a central part in providing care to individuals with long-lasting needs. This includes those experiencing age-related dependency, chronic diseases, disabilities, and of course, mental health issues. Today, between 12 and 20% of the EU population is involved in informal long-term care. In Greece, this figure rises to a remarkable 34%, according to some sources. Informal carers, that is, our friends, our neighbors, our family members, contribute a staggering 80% of all care in Europe outside of a professional context, and in many cases without any professional support. A noteworthy aspect of this is the gender dimension, as it is primarily women who provide informal caregiving as daughters, as wives, and as partners. But the provision of informal care does not come without a cost for informal carers themselves and for society as a whole. Without proper support, many carers face additional expenditure related to the condition of the person they care for. Their caregiving responsibilities can become a barrier as they try to access education and employment. Working carers often find themselves in a precarious balancing act and are sometimes forced to reduce their working hours or leave the job market altogether. All of this also has an impact on their income and pension entitlements. When it comes to the theme of today's discussion, the correlation between caregiving, physical and mental health is also well established. Research has highlighted the stress and burden associated with informal caregiving, which presents all the features of a chronic stress experience: an enduring physical and psychological strain, high levels of unpredictability and uncontrollability, as well as the constant need for vigilance. These demands often generate secondary stress affecting multiple aspects of life, including education, work, social inclusion, and economic well-being. The consequences can be severe, leading to psychological distress like anxiety or even depression. In fact, the prevalence of mental health issues among non-working carers is 20% higher than among non-carers. These adverse effects are particularly pronounced in high-intensity caregiving situations, such as dementia care, for example. I should also add that informal carers play a central part in the prevention of mental health issues by offering emotional support, recognizing early signs, and by facilitating early interventions. So, supporting informal carers is not just about preventing social inequalities. It is a public health issue. I therefore invite each of you in your work to see informal carers as potential partners in care, but also as individuals at risk of mental health issues. Thank you all so much for your kind attention. I hope you will have a truly fruitful discussion, one that brings about changes, positive changes, for both informal carers and of course for the individuals they care for. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. This was an excellent talk, very short but very comprehensive, and provided us with a lot of information. So we have come to the end of the speakers, and now I will ask Professor Nikos Christodoulou to take the floor and pass some comments on these talks, and perhaps volunteer some comments of his own.
Thank you very much. It's been a very stimulating session, this one. There are a lot of ideas flying around and a lot of different perspectives, but there are a number of different converging ideas that I picked up from the speakers. So I'm just going to go into them and then go individually to each of the speakers' ideas and perhaps expand on them a little bit, because there's a lot to be gained from this discussion, I feel. So I picked up 4 themes in what everyone said. One theme has to do with equality and fairness, which is, of course, the main deficit in what we call stigma. And this has been approached in many different ways, from an institutional discrimination aspect that mentally ill people perceive and accept from society, to a reduced access to services and reduced access to funding and resources. The second theme I picked up was in terms of a deficit, not in knowledge or direction, but of implementation. And that has been mentioned by many speakers, including and Vasilis Bozikas and Norman Sartorius. The third theme I picked up was adversity is to be expected in the future in the form of disasters and climate change, as Vasilis Bozikas and also Professor Wasserman and Dr. Lazeri mentioned, but also from disasters of other nature. And the fourth theme that I picked up was that of a solution, and that is no other than prevention, that many people mentioned, and offers a very cost-effective but also clinically effective and ethically effective solution. So going into each of the speakers' points and expanding on those 4 themes, George Christodoulou mentioned in his introduction the difference how laws and declarations expect an implementation. Alas, they do not. So the culture prevails in the end is often different than the implementations. And the implementation of those declarations, as Deputy Minister also mentioned in his address, the implementation is most of it has to do with cuts in funding, and that puts mental health last in the priorities of political implementation. That is exacerbated by the fact, as Professor Bozikas went on to mention, is by climate change and the fact that all the funding is going to be stressed. Of course, as Prof. Christodoulou mentioned, it's going to go first for mental health and then for everything else. So we expect a future that is not bright. That gives us a lot of responsibility and a lot of hardship to follow. That was underlined extensively by Professor Sartorius. What he said about stigma, that it will grow in the future, and it will grow because resources are going to become more scarce. So we have the concept of commodification taking effect. That concept is very worrying in my opinion, because it makes the most important principle of attributing and distributing wealth, and that is utilitarianism, inefficient. It actually goes against utilitarianism. Commodification, by definition, distributes good services to those who can afford it. And therefore, wealth is not, and resources are not distributed to as broad a basis as possible. So resource allocation is one of the points that Professor Sartorius brought up and linked that problem of unequal resource allocation to that concept of commodification. Commodification is also came up a little bit later in other speakers' points. Professor Sartorius also mentioned implementation in terms of science in his address. What he said was that even though we have the evidence base to implement, we do not implement as such. The concept that he brought up was a very nice one. He mentioned it, enlightened opportunism, as a solution to that problem. The way that I see that is that you don't have to wait for excellent quality evidence to practically implement. You have to be quick and implement before you get that golden evidence, because if you don't do that, then you end up with not helping people when you actually have the means to do so. And that violates one of the most important principles of medical practice, and that's non-maleficence. So you're doing bad to your patients by not implementing something that can be helpful just because you're waiting for the best possible evidence. In fact, back in the day when Greece had a problem with its financial situation, not that it doesn't still, but when things were really bad, I argued in a paper I wrote for something similar, which I called at that point evidence-based heurism. Heurism being the process of applying something which is practically meaningful, even though you do not have a golden evidence base. Effectively, it is the same as the enlightened opportunism that Professor Sartorius mentioned. The advantages of this approach, of the enlightened opportunism or heurism, is that it is fast, it is fair, and it is also effective. And as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't violate those basic principles of medicine. Another point that Professor Sartorius brought up, which was very interesting, was to not apply a universal education for anti-stigma, but to focus it on groups that are able to seed that idea in a more targeted manner. Mentioned schools and other specific professional areas. What I have to say to that is that using people who are not experts to distribute more widely does fit into that enlightened opportunism idea. It is more effective and it spreads the message further, but I would add also that it modifies the message according to what they feel is more important for their own environment. That is something that we cannot do a priori. We're not able to modify the message to fit every single environment. We have to trust people who distribute that message to fit it and make it fit for purpose in their own special environment. I like this idea. It supports and nurtures leadership in community. And that is something that we need. We cannot do that on our own as psychiatrists. We cannot just distribute the idea of anti-stigma. We have to let it take seed and flourish in the community and let it take its own course. The last point I picked up from Professor Sartorius' talk was that it is not important to change attitudes. We have to change in paradigm and change behavior. And that links very nicely with what other speakers today mentioned about implementation. Changing attitudes is great, and it's very difficult to do. It is one of the Aristotelian high levels of education. You have to have good skills in order to be able to change attitudes through education. But that's not enough. Even though it's difficult, it is not enough. What is the target here is to change behaviors, i.e. implementation. Now, how do you do that? That's a more difficult thing to achieve. Professor Wasserman then went on to speak about the increasing disability that we see from a number of studies. Where that reminded me of the burden of disease study, which was very bleak on the level of disability brought about by mental illnesses. In particular, its projection for the future was quite alarming, but then went on to offer one of the best solutions that I heard today from a number of different speakers. And that solution was prevention. That concept of prevention is, in my opinion, as I mentioned earlier, one of the 4 basic themes of today's presentations, but in my opinion, it is the most effective. Not only effective, cost-effective, but also ethically effective. Why is it ethically effective? Because it offers justice a priori. It is not an afterthought, as Dr. Lazzeri said. It's forethought. It offers justice a priori, from before. Why is that? Because patients, through prevention, do not suffer non-maleficence or non-beneficence by the system. They do not suffer reduced autonomy, and they don't suffer reduced justice. It's the only way to avoid all 4. And it is the only way to avoid all four a priori. Right. The other point that Professor Wasserman, then going on to Dr. Lazzeri. Dr. Lazzeri also mentioned about disasters and suggested that the resources have to be allocated accordingly. It's the same point that Professor Bozikas mentioned earlier. Disasters and the future climatic change that we're already seeing is an important point, because we have to take into account and take into consideration the fact that society is going to be compressed by all the ramifications of climate change. Now, the question arises, why are we talking about mental health when climate change is going to affect all of our lives? I think the answer is that if we don't take steps to ensure that the mental health of your population is safeguarded, then the social unrest and the ramification in the social network of disasters is going to be multiple times worse, and it's going to function as a self-fulfilling prophecy for the deterioration of public health as a whole. So in essence, what I'm saying is that since we're picking up that disasters are going to have such a broad effect in mental health, and that is going to multiply problems in society, we have a duty of leadership to highlight this and to make a case, an even stronger case based on climate change for mental health care, and more resources to be allocated there. And not to be allocated alone, but to be smartly allocated, as Dr. Lazeri said. He said that smart investment through prevention, through focused and targeted implementation is what we need. And I fully agree. And last but not least, Dr. Panagiotopoulou and Mr. Igemonos mentioned the unimaginable void that would be left if informal carers suddenly stopped caring for people. I was shocked by the fact that 80% of carers are informal, but I was even more shocked by the idea that commodification, as Professor Sartorius mentioned, is going to transform this 80% into a service that is going to be needing support. If commodification takes hold for 80% of caring in mental health, that means that the burden, the resource burden for mental health is going to be completely unfathomable. And the question arises from that, and I have this rhetorical question. What happened before? Why can't society go to what it was before, when informal carers were able to care for their mentally ill without being in a position of financial need? Because before all financial services were put in place 100 to 100 years ago, families were looking after their own, and that was not a problem. I don't have an answer to that. It is a social answer. It is an answer for social economists to approach. But to finish my commentary, but to that thought, Mr. Igemonos mentioned something which perhaps is the approach to take when thinking about supporting informal carers. And that is to see mental health as what it is in terms of public health. So it is a public health issue that requires a holistic approach, and as such, it requires an investment in those who support it the most, and that and those are informal carers. So thanks for the space. That's all I had to say. I hope it wasn't too much.
Thank you, Nikos. I'm very happy that you have dealt with all speakers' points. And now I think it's we have some time, so I will ask all speakers to respond to what Nikos said, to comment on the commentaries of the commentator. So let's start from Vasilis Bozikas. Vasilis, are you still there? Vasilis has probably left. Then Norman, would you like to pass some comments in general or respond to what Nikos has said?
First, wanted to express admiration for how well he has done it. He has, in fact, dealt with items that were mentioned and linked them together. And I think that they all come to a common ground. I think of the need for a major social change if we want to provide care to people who have suffered from mental illness, and to provide help also to the carers who look after them, to have a society which will be healthy and well. Perhaps it would be worth thinking just for a moment about the progress of science in resolving situation. But I think that progress of science will undoubtedly bring solutions to many of the problems, probably shorten the time of illness when illness occurs, probably prevent some of the illnesses when they appear. But that is the idea that science will resolve everything is certainly not one that one could hope for. So I think that we should very carefully search and examine whatever science can bring us, but at the same time make much more effort to bring society into a state of mind which will be people who are members of my society deserve care, they deserve help. They should be given help, their carers must be given help, and we must have a society that will be thinking about them as being members which are essential to the existence of humanity. And I think that change of attitude is a very important one. It was not always present in the past. There was no idea of public health. Gradually, the idea of public health became more accepted. I think we have to move much more in thinking about the ways in which societies are organized so as to ensure that, in fact, people who are ill get help, the people who give them care also get support, and that we offer them a life that is worth living. So I think maybe this is one additional point that I'd like to make.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Norman. Kelly, would you like to pass a comment?
Thank you, Professor Christodoulou, and thank you, Professor Nikos Christodoulou, for your comments. I would only like to say one more thing. Perhaps we should think within our historical era, because answering to your question about the past, when people lived in villages and there was the big family, and there was the house economy with the chickens and the goats, it was an entirely different historical era. Now we have to deal with our historical period. And so if every one of us thinks for a moment that maybe tomorrow I will be in the place of a mentally ill person, or the family informal carer of this person, how should I feel? How would I feel? What would I do? How would I live my life? And what can I do in my small group of people to help them be in the society equally? I think this is the only way. If we think, because people, we are selfish, you see. we can think only first of ourselves. So if I were a mentally ill person, if I were the care of that person, what I would like to do, how would I like to be in the community. And so let us approach those people having this in mind. Thank you very much
Okay.
for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. Spyros, do you have any comments? Would you like to say something?
No, thank you. I have no further comments.
I have some comments then. This commoditification of psychiatry, which is a very important point, I thought, listening to Norman, that is very anti-Hippocratic, because Hippocrates has taught that the doctor is equal to God, and that the doctor's behavior in real life, not only in his professional life or her professional life, but in his personal life or her personal life, the doctor should be a paradigm for other people. So this commoditification of psychiatry, which brings in mind the element of exchange and the element of industrialization of science, in this particular case of psychiatry, is very much against the Hippocratic spirit. Then I was impressed with what Norman said about the information about illness producing a worse outcome. I would agree to that, because many years ago, I had the idea at Eginirion Hospital. I was at that time director of the psychiatry department. So I asked a colleague, Lefteris Likouras, who became a professor of psychiatry after that, and unfortunately died from brain cancer. So Lefteris undertook this task because at that time, a large group of nurses who had no idea about psychiatric nursing came into hospital, and we thought that we should give them some training before they went to the wards to serve. So we gave them a training of 10 lessons, referring to psychopathology and basic things in psychiatry. So I thought that perhaps we could do some small research on that. So we gave them a questionnaire, which included the issues of stigma, issues of how they saw psychiatry, what they thought about the symptoms in mental illness, and things like that, whether this situation, these lessons improved their knowledge and their position and their stance towards mental illness. And after they finished this training and they completed the questionnaire, Lefteris came to my office in panic. So he said, the findings were unpredictable. We can't publish these findings. Why? I said, because they became worse. Their opinion was worse than before. So they developed stigma instead of easing their existing stigma. So this is very much in line with what Norman said about this issue. Then I understood from Norman that for anti-stigma, we need a long road. It's not either a high road or a low road. It's a long road. You know, high road and low road refer to the Scottish song. I'll take the high road, then you'll take the low road. So this is a long road, neither of the two. And then we come to the hidden curriculum to which Nikos Christodoulou has given, about which Nikos has given a talk a week ago when we had a similar presentation for the Greek audience about the World Mental Health Day. The hidden curriculum, that is to say the paradigm, the way you behave, the way you treat your patients, the way you approach mental illness is much more effective than teaching. And this is very important to follow. Then I was very much interested in what Lydia Lazeri said about the digital community. This is something I hadn't thought about, because we all realize that things are changing. we no longer have the family in most countries. We have increased electronic communication. It may be unfortunate, but it is inevitable. So we will have a digital community from now on. So we must be prepared for it and see what we can do in order to avoid the possible catastrophic effects that this may have. Concerning the service users and the participation of service users in decision-making, I would like to stress the point and inform people who are not informed that the World Federation for Mental Health, WFMH, is an organization which includes users, service users, patients. And this may create certain difficulties in decision-making, but it is more representative because it includes the people who receive the services of professionals. Therefore, they should be in a position, and they should be allowed to have the right to decide and contribute to the formation of policies on issues that refer to them. Concerning the budgets, of course, a better distribution is essential, and not only towards the line of promotion and prevention, but also towards the amelioration of existing services. Mental hospitals, for example, have not improved to the desired extent, and we do not want to confront issues like the Leros issue anymore. Concerning the carers, of course, most carers are women and young women who sacrifice their lives sometimes for the sake of the parents and the grandparents they serve and they look after. And this is unfair. It's unfair for them. So I think it's important to develop a policy by which informal carers interact and exchange positions with paid carers so that they have time to go to the doctor, to go to recreate themselves, to go to the dentist. One of the major issues with informal carers is that they have bad dental hygiene. It has been pointed out repeatedly. And now, how do we explain that in Greece we have a great proportion of informal carers? Because in Greece we still have the family. We have strong family ties. Therefore, it's an obligation. It's thought that it is an obligation for younger people to look after their parents and their grandparents. So I think we have 5 minutes and we should end. I would like to say that I'm grateful to all of you for having participated in this, I think, very constructive meeting. And also I would like to add that mental health sails in dangerous waters, but recovery is still achievable, and patients can live a productive and rewarding life if we recognize and accept and promote the idea that mental health is a universal human right. And with this, I would like to thank Spyros and EPIONI for having arranged this meeting, to thank all of you for your participation, and to wish you all the best in your life and in the life of your patients. Thank you very much.